Darkness then came over me and troubled me, but hardly had I felt this when, by opening my eyes, as I now suppose, the light poured in upon me again. I walked, and, I believe, descended. But I presently found a great alteration in my senses. Before, dark and opaque bodies had surrounded me, impervious to my touch or sight. But I now found that I could wander on at liberty, with no obstacles which I could not either surmount or avoid. The monster speaks. Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Ford, and we're here for Chapter 11 of Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. This video will have four separate sections: a So What Happened recap of the chapter, a literary criticism section where we talk about the literary goings-on in this chapter, a writer's corner portion of the video, which really only has one note, and finally, an Adrian's Corner, something that has been largely absent from this series, but we have something juicy to talk about. So, what happened? We get accounts from the monster. He scavenged about eating berries and such until he found a cottage which he entered, at which time the man living there exited promptly, in bewilderment and terror. So, with great solemnity, the monster ate all his food and left. He walked the livelong day before finding a village, and then he entered another house. This, of course, caused consternation, pure pandemonium, which in turn stirred the whole village, and everyone yelled and threw things. So he fled. Then he set up outside a farm in the woods. The next morning he watched a girl and her brother going about their morning chores. He watches through the window as an old man plays music for the girl. Later, he watches all of them share some time before going to bed. There are some interesting things going on in this chapter, but really this chapter kind of brings up more questions than it does answers, even from the way you look at it if you are examining the subtitle, The Modern Myth of Prometheus, as well. So the first thing that is worth talking about is the fact that the monster, as he is called, begins his journey by searching for berries. This is putting the monster in the frame of a hunter-gatherer. So very much like civilization itself, the monster is being started at primitive means. He is going out, he is collecting berries, he is eating that way, and then he finds his way into civilization and is learning civilization as he goes. He goes from a one-person hovel in the woods, finds his way to a village, and then goes back to basically farming. The farming comes in human evolution shortly after the hunter-gatherer way of life, and what we can use this to look at is if we are looking at the monster as technology, if we are looking at the monster as symbolic for perhaps weapons of mass destruction, it's very easy to translate the monster himself as the bomb, the atom bomb. And then you have Frankenstein sort of in this role of the Manhattan Project, creating this weapon of mass destruction. And we can look at this as humanity found its way to civilization, realized the extent of its own power, the way that humanity then created the atom bomb, the bomb to end all bombs, and reverted. The bomb goes off, right? Technology breaks down. Technology gets too advanced, too destructive. and humankind is... So in that little village, everyone freaks out at Frankenstein's monster. And I almost did it. And there's a war, basically, and the civilization pushes the monster, the bomb, out. So he is forced to retreat to a lesser form of civilization, which is farming, agriculture. Just interesting to see how that worked out further. On page 102 of my copy, we get this passage. Several changes of day and night passed, and the orb of night had greatly lessened when I began to distinguish my sensations from each other. I gradually saw plainly the clear stream that supplied me with drink and the trees that shaded me with their foliage. I was delighted when I first discovered that a pleasant sound which often saluted my ears proceeded from the throats of the little winged animals who had so often intercepted the light from my eyes. I began to observe with greater accuracy the forms that surrounded me, and to perceive the boundaries of the radiant roof of light which canopied me. Sometimes I tried to imitate the pleasant songs to the birds, but was unable. Sometimes I wished to express my sensations in my own mode, but the uncouth and inarticulate sounds which broke from me frightened me into silence again. Now, one thing that is interesting to note here is this. Wow, what did I do here? Is this the monster gaining awareness of the world around him, the way that children start to gain awareness of those things without him, around them? Is the monster gaining consciousness the way they say we gain consciousness around the age of 4 or 5 or whatever it is? Or is the monster regaining memory from his reanimated brain? It's not addressed here. I will talk about this later in the Writer's Corner section of things. But as a reader, we are left to question these things and how they are working, the mechanics of this world, the mechanics of the monster himself. And then on 103, one day, when I was oppressed by cold, I found a fire which had been left by some wandering beggars, and was overcome with delight at the warmth I had experienced from it. In my joy, I thrust out my hand into the live embers, but quickly drew it out again with a cry of pain. This is an irony in this story. This chapter here is sort of filled with ironies. The irony here being that the monster is cast as a demon, cast as evil, cast as something from hell itself. But the hellfire still burns him. He is completely ignorant of the fire and its effects. Talking about the fire and its effects, we have to wonder here about that subtitle. Originally, Frankenstein, as we know it today, was titled Frankenstein or Frankenstein or The Myth of the Modern Prometheus. I don't think it's on. Yeah, it's not here. The Myth of the Modern Prometheus. Obviously, Prometheus stole fire from the gods and gave it to humankind, and was then punished eternally with his being pecked at by birds, having his organs ripped out. But here, fire symbolizes creation. Fire symbolizes destruction. Fire symbolizes light. That is the ability to see. That is the light only comes from heat. Light only comes from fire. Light. Okay. It also symbolizes technology. Fire, the first technology that humans had. At least we think. At least one of the very first technologies that humans had. So the idea that the monster, which represents technology, is scared of technology, is burned by technology, is burned by light, is burned by goodness, is burned by creation, or is the monster here burned by destruction? Which of these things should we take from this story going forward? What is it that fire would hereby represent to the monster himself? So, what we have here is a science fiction book. And oftentimes, like fantasy, what you have to do with science fiction is you have to build the world and the expectations. Science fiction takes something that is scientific, something that exists in real life, and expands upon it. But we don't really get the rules for that in this text. We have the monster who is going around and he does not remember civility, he does not remember civilization, he does not remember privacy, these sorts of things that would keep him from walking into someone else's house the way that he has. But he seemingly does know what is and is not edible. He even knows the English words for things like milk and cheese and bread. He even knows the word for something that he seemingly may not have had in his prior life, something like wine, which he states very clearly he did not like. He does not, however, remember fire. Uh, so, and I don't care how much he's speaking like an adult. So that brain of his is working. That brain of his, even if he has been taken into shelter somewhere and taught some things, that does not excuse the fact that he knows so much. He knows all of the rules of English. He knows all of these things that could not have come to him as quickly as he could not have learned as in as short amount of time as he has been re-alived. So I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing. The ambiguity in the text can be good, but it is set up in this story as not ambiguity, but simply unexplained. In science, in basically all fiction, you have to build the world you're living in, even if this is literary fiction, which is basically just real life. You're building the world as it is seen from the protagonist or the speaker or the narrator. So I think that there is some bit of explanation that would go a long way in this text, something that I think is missing from this text and wouldn't just solve those riddles in the text, but would expand upon it and make it more intriguing. If we were given that the monster has these remnant memories in his brain that are sparking back to him, but some of them come, some of them don't. He has shades of memories, he has ideas about things. That would be something very interesting for the text to play with, but we don't get that from the text as it is now. That world building process is something that can really take a text to the next level. We have here things with this text that would have been certainly at the time very, very, uh, what would you say? I mean, controversial for sure, but would have been at the forefront of the sort of philosophical ideas of the time. And to play with those ideas the way that the way that the author Mary Shelley is playing with the ideas of reanimating dead tissues, playing with the ideas of what that means for the soul inherent to the individual, those religious ideas at the core of this. If the monster does not have any memories, is this a brand new soul? Has Frankenstein therefore created a soul the way that God would have? Or is this an individual, sort of an automaton, one that does not have a soul? Is there such thing as a soul? Is Frankenstein's monster one of these catalysts to make People question whether or not a soul exists. Does Frankenstein's monster question this in himself? Those are things that would have been very interesting at the forefront of getting some type of narrative from the monster outside of whether or not this individual, this monster, is having memories sparked up. So I think that the first time, as a writer, what to take from this is world building, rules laying, and understanding the opportunity you have when you get a character speaking for himself for the very first time. We have seen the monster before. We have been left to wonder about the monster before, but we have not heard from the monster before. So this was, in my opinion, sort of a wasted opportunity here. We simply have recounting of what has gone on, and none of the philosophical, religio-philosophical or sort of ethical questions and dilemmas that come up from this individual being in the world. I want to talk about darkness. The monster's darkness is his appearance, the way he looks. He shows up and people freak out. People believe that he is evil, believe that he is the monster, as he is called. He is castigated, he is cast out, he is put upon. And one of my favorite things about literature is that when we allow it to, when we let it, when we are willing to put ourselves in the book, literature shows us ourselves. And that is not always pretty. The monster, though he is looked at as a monster, he is simple. He is not particularly evil. He seems to have a grudge against Frankenstein, but wouldn't you, if you were thrust into life in that way and then abandoned as he was? When we allow ourselves into the page, we understand that this is a metaphor for ourselves. We understand that this darkness of the monster is simply superficial, but all of us carry within us some type of darkness, some type of hate, some type of anger, some type of darkness. There is darkness in all of us. None of us are so simple as the monster here. None of us are pure. None of us are particularly innocent. If we were wearing our darkness on the outside, if you were wearing your anger, your hatred as your countenance, when you showed up different places, would people treat you the same? When you found your way into some new society, some new group of people, would they accept you? The monster in this story is not particularly evil, but he is treated as such because the people who look upon him are not able to distinguish his appearance from his depth, his looks from his quality, his countenance from what it is that he really is. If we all wore our darkness on the outside, would we all be treated the same way that the monster is treated in Frankenstein?